All right, continuing with our mailbag without any kind of preface needed for me explaining what we're doing. The question comes from Electra Weeds 7, not Electra Weeds 6 or 8. A lot of people get confused. It's Electra Weeds 7. And the question is this, quote, I have a question about free speech and its limits, especially in the context of what's happening in Palestine. You often emphasize ideological consistency in first principles, and you've also spoken powerfully about the ongoing genocide in Gaza. Given that, how do you think decades of dehumanizing rhetoric and normalized hate speech against Palestinians have helped create the conditions in which this violence is not only tolerated, but in many ways enabled, both by global leaders and by the broader public? To what extent has the unchecked spread of certain ideas and narratives, even into the banner of free speech, laid the psychological groundwork for this genocide? Not just among the Israeli leadership, but also among parts of the global public who still view this either as fake news or as a justified campaign to, quote, eliminate Hamas. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how we reconcile the principled defense of free speech with the undeniable power of language to do real harm. And we are seeing now, as we are seeing now and repeatedly have seen throughout history. So it is a very good question. There was actually a point I wanted to make over the last couple of days, because there were a lot of Charlie Kirk quotes going around after he was murdered that were designed to cast him in a critical light, which I personally see nothing wrong with. I talked about how morally repulsive I think it is and corrosive of the soul to celebrate any human being's death. So I'm separating that from when somebody becomes this very important figure in our discourse and culture, and there's one side kind of trying to glorify them and turn them into a symbol of a political movement. It's perfectly acceptable to speak critically of that person as well. He's part of our politics. He was part of our politics. He is part of our politics. And it's not a religion. You don't have to submit to anyone's hagiography. So I have no objection to people saying, you know what, actually, I thought some of what Charlie Kirk said or did was actually not worthy of praise, but was actually quite harmful. That's very legitimate. And one of the ways that's being done by the people who are doing that is circulating various quotes of Charlie Kirk to try and show, oh, look, these are the things that he thought. And one of the quotes that began circulating almost from the day that he was murdered, but I continue to see to this day, is the one where he basically was asked, okay, you believe in the Second Amendment. Well, doesn't that mean if we have no gun control, if guns are everywhere, that there are going to be certain gun deaths that could be avoided? Maybe there'll be kids who find guns and pick them up and end up accidentally shooting themselves or somebody else, which has happened. Maybe it'll mean that some crazy people will be more readily able to get guns and will kill people, as certainly has happened. A whole variety of ways that a permissive interpretation of the Second Amendment might generate more deaths by guns. And being intellectually honest, Charlie Kirk said, yes, I think that's probably true, but it's worth it to protect the Second Amendment. Some deaths are worth it to protect the Second Amendment. And that quote was being circulated to try and cast Charlie Kirk as some sort of extremist, that, oh, look, he's willing to tolerate gun deaths in order to protect the Second Amendment. That's what an extremist he is, and also to imply that there was something ironic or even some kind of karmic justice about what happened to him, given that he was saying he's willing to tolerate deaths by gun violence in order to protect the Second Amendment. It turns out that his life was taken by gun violence. And as I said, while I don't mind criticism of Charlie Kirk, I find the attempt to use that quote against him to be so distorted and twisted in a very important and central way that relates directly to the question that I was asked, which is why I raised it, which is that I think it's so important to emphasize and to understand, because it's not immediately obvious. It's almost counterintuitive, but it's nonetheless true. We have these Bill of Rights that most Americans affirm a belief in and often insist upon their preservation. First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the right of search and seizure, to not be searched without a search warrant, to have your papers and your person searched and seized, or your home. Due process rights, all the rights that attend to criminal prosecution, the right to remain silent, the right to confront witnesses in cross-examination, the right to an attorney, the right to have a jury of your peers, determine your guilt or innocence, all of these due process guarantees, and all the other rights of the Constitution as well. And every single one of them have significant costs to them, including the risk of death. If you allowed police carte blanche to just enter whatever houses they want, as happens in many countries. There's some murder or a serial murderer or some serial rapists or pedophiles or terrorists or whatever, and the government wants the police to find them and tells the police, do whatever you have to do to find them. And if the police are able to just enter whatever homes they want and ransack them or search whoever they want, it's going to be easier for them to find those criminals, including violent criminals who are on the loose. But if you put barriers in the place of the police, like the Bill of Rights does, if you say, no, you can't just go and search whatever homes you want. You first have to go to a court and persuade a judge that there's probable cause to believe that there's some information relevant to a crime, and only then can you enter somebody's home. If you don't have a warrant, says the Constitution, the police, the homeowner can refuse your right to enter, and you can't enter that home. And if you do enter and you search it anyway without a warrant, whatever you find won't be usable in a court of law. And obviously, not just that, that right means that the police are going to be impeded in catching violent criminals. It definitely means that some violent criminals who the police may have been able to catch, had they been unconstrained in their searching power, instead are going to end up escaping the police and stay on the loose and maybe even kill again. Same thing with the privacy rights in terms of that we impose on the NSA or the FBI in terms of spying on Americans. If they could just spy on everybody, they would definitely be able to catch people more easily and solve crimes more easily. But because we tell them that you can't spy on us without warrants, we make it more difficult for them to catch violent criminals and to stop violence from happening in the future. And there's no doubt that people have died as a result of those barriers that the Bill of Rights puts in front of the police. And the same is definitely true of due process rights. I mean, both Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin said that they think it would be better to have, in the case of Jefferson, he said, I'd rather have 10 guilty people go free than have one innocent person punished. Benjamin Franklin said, I would rather have 100 guilty people go free than have even one innocent person unjustly imprisoned. And this came from British law and British legal thinking. And this is central to our Bill of Rights. The idea is that we do want to put barriers in front of the state to be able to put people in prison. All those rights that I just mentioned. The right against self-incrimination, to remain silent, the right to an attorney, the right to confront witnesses, to have a jury of your peers. All these rights that are guaranteed to you if you're charged with a crime make it much more difficult for the state to imprison you or to convict you of a crime. Even though the founders knew, and we all know, that means that in certain cases, guilty people like O.J. Simpson are going to walk free. And we've decided that it's worth it. We're willing to have violent criminals walk free and not be convicted and not end up in prison to kill again in order to make sure that we have these due process rights. So each of these rights, the Second Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, all the rights of the Fifth Amendment of due process and all the other accompanying rights relating to criminal trials and the like, they all result in death. They all result in increased violence. They all make it more difficult for the government to do things we might want the government to do. But we've decided it's worth it, which is what Charlie Kirk was saying. Yes, I'll concede, he said, that by insisting on the Second Amendment and by preventing certain kinds of gun control, there probably will be more deaths by gun violence, including types of deaths from gun violence that we wish we could prevent. But that's the cost of living in a free society. And that's all he was saying. And I think it's very important to understand that. Now, the reason I say it's relevant to the question is because the question was, does allowing free speech entail dehumanizing other people to the point where even genocide against them ends up being tolerable by allowing free speech and Israel supporters to demonize Palestinians for decades, to deprive them of their humanity, to spread propaganda on behalf of Israel to the point where the world was even willing to sit by and allow a genocide to take place? Isn't that a gigantic harm from free speech? And the answer is yes. There's no question that protecting free speech often will entail not just problems, but serious harm to other people and probably even death. In exactly the same way that all those other constitutional rights engender those kind of risks and damages. But we have decided as a people, as a country, as a culture that the dangers of eliminating those rights, of allowing the government to censor, allowing the government to take away people's guns, allowing the government to walk into homes whenever they want, just on mere suspicion or a guesswork or a whim, or just convicting people that we know are guilty without bothering to go through the protections of the trial. We've decided that it's more dangerous to abolish those rights than it is to live with the costs of insisting on them, even though the costs are very real. And so, yes, of course, free speech means that certain people are going to get dehumanized. It means certain words are going to be justified based on lies. It means a whole wide range of bad things are going to happen, and that people are going to be convinced of all sorts of things we wish they weren't convinced of. But to me, the obvious solution is not to say, okay, U.S. government, we're going to trust you now with the power to censor, because we're going to hope that you will censor speech that dehumanizes Palestinians. Do you think the U.S. government in its current constitution, I don't just mean the Trump administration, I mean all the presidencies before that, would use its censorship power to protect Palestinians? What we've seen is the exact opposite. Censorship is being used to silence critics of Israel. And that's true for each of one of these rights. And I think it's important to be honest, the way Charlie Kirk is being when his defense of the Second Amendment, which is to say, yeah, these rights do have costs. And sometimes those costs are even violence or the death of other people. But it's worth it, because the alternative is living in a totalitarian state or an autocratic state or a repressive state rather than a free society. And that is the price you pay. That's one of the things I've learned in life, is that there's nothing free. I think balance is the overarching law of the universe. Every time you gain something, there's a cost that's extracted. And every time there's a cost that's extracted, there's a value also received. And it's the same with political rights. There are benefits from having political rights, but there are also costs. I think that's what Charlie Kirk was saying. I think it's important for free speech advocates to acknowledge that as well. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.